Every place you go is a Petri dish.
Yeah.
And every person that dives in that Petri dish is going to change the culture. And unfortunately, when we hit our budgets, and when it's budget time, right, very often it's like, oh, we don't need that. We're just going to cut the training out.
Hello, my name is Jason Reichl, and you're listening to Risk Management Brick by Brick. I'm fascinated with people who are helping build and maintain the physical world around us. On each episode of this podcast, we'll dive in with a risk manager, speak to them about how technology plays a role in this process.
Hello, welcome to Brick by Brick. Thank you for joining me. We're here at IAAPA. You have a very busy IAAPA. I'm excited to talk about the different things you're doing, specifically the talk you're doing around, I just love the title, which is Clown Bias. But before we get in that, why don't you introduce yourself, your background, all of that good jazz.
So, well, thank you first, Jason, for having me.
Of course, I'm excited.
On. This is exciting. And I know while people don't necessarily find risk per se to be a very thrilling topic.
I do.
I think it's interesting, and I think I really appreciate you reaching out to different voices, because I think that also makes it accessible to more people.
Yeah. Understanding.
But let's see, who am I? That's a loaded question. I've been in the industry for way longer than I want to remember, but I started my career in Southern California at Disneyland. I'm a California native, so that seems like a natural transition. But that first start actually allowed me to grow my career. I started in the entertainment side of things. So I started as a performer and a writer, director, actor, all those kinds of things. Entertainment contracts are short-lived. So I learned operations. I picked up on operations, which allowed me to extend my career. But what has happened is it's taken me around the world. So I have become well known for having expertise in the area of culture and understanding how to take a knowledge base, a strong knowledge base when it comes to hiring, training, entertainment, retail, what have you, but apply it to the culture of where I am, because where you are in the world is very different. Yeah. And you need to be respectful of that and understand that. So that's kind of been my stock and trade. And I feel very fortunate for having done that, but it's put me in a position now where I can talk to people about a whole spectrum of things.
Absolutely.
And hopefully make people feel better about their work and elevate their operations.
We share a similar background. I started on the entertainment side and moved over to operations over time. Really love that. Love your focus on training and making that part of the culture. We were talking about that, but let's start off. So for leaders listening, what does effective training have? Why does it have an impact? Like, is it about consistency, confidence? What is the effectiveness of training?
What does training do?
Yeah, what does training do? I mean, we all know about I've been trained to operate this thing or do this thing, but I think when you're talking about training, it's something bigger than that. So let's.
That is a fantastic question, because I think training too often gets overlooked in the mix. And unfortunately, when we hit our budgets, and when it's budget time, right, very often it's like, oh, we don't need that. We're just going to cut the training out. But training is the piece of the puzzle that actually is the interactive component of our operations, regardless of what your industry is. So you could be in hospitality, working behind a hotel desk, but you could also be working at a reception at a hospital. Where you're interacting. So that training piece and that humanity part of it is really what training is. The other thing that happens very often is people will not retrain. Right. So they will miss that piece of it. But I would tell anybody that in terms of the risk to your business, in terms of a financial return and gains, that training is actually a critical component. And if you are going to reduce something, you might want to look elsewhere.
Yeah, right. Well, let's talk about communication models and training, because this is something you talk a lot about tone, empathy, interaction. So what is the right communication model when you are training let's say adults to do their work or something that they might already feel like they're an expert in some ways? What's a communication model look like?
Fantastic. I think one of the misnomers is that people, when they think of training, they think it's just of entry-level people, right? So they think of high school kids, right? Or they think of college students, someone that's just graduated. So there's kind of this mindset that, everything is base level. That is not true, because even a C-suite executive can do with a refresh once in a while about, about communication. But what I found most effective is instead of necessarily focusing on what the group is that you have, which is extremely important because you need to be receptive to your audience. You need to know who's in the room and adjust your topic to fit that group. It's using multi-level learning practices.
Right. This is what I want to dive into.
So when you're training, remembering that there are people that are visual. So do you have charts? Do you have graphs? Do you have pictures? Do you have things that someone who is a visually attentive person is going to pay attention to? Are you using great language? Are you using good words? Are you being thoughtful about the volume of language you're using? Because people that are linguistic are going to be very enchanted by the language you use.
Right.
Is it somebody who's oral, which means somebody who likes music and is very affected by the noise around them, the sound around them?
Old slogans we used to hear. That
exactly,
was training,
right? Jingles, right?
Yep.
Things like that. As somebody that's a trainer that knows how to use their voice will dive into, on occasion, a sing-songy kind of example of, let me talk to you about this way, or they'll go into something rhythmic or use limericks or rhymes or things that are going to appeal. Physicality, right? Physicality gets lost, especially when people are presenting, right? They get behind the lectern and they stand up there and their PowerPoint's behind them and they're stock still. They're not doing anything. But if you get out
for kinetic learners, they're not going to be picking up.
They're not going to pick up, right? So if you get out from behind the lectern and you walk around and you move, right? You're making people change their position, move around, add an activity, add something that's going to engage them on some level. And then you have solo learners. I can go on this forever, but you have solo learners, people that they do really well by themselves. They like solo tasks, they like things. So ask reflective prompts. What do you think? And then group activities, because there's social learners, people that do much better in small groups. So you break people up and have something to do.
I think one of the misnomers so I started my career and I worked at a company who we may produce educational videos, different things like that, special effects videos. But one of the things that's interesting is that this misnomer that people are one type of learner too.
Oh,
everyone has an entryway that they need to be cooked to, but you're not going to sound like a schizophrenic person up there moving from thing to thing. You're actually going to be hooking people, and people will be with you as you're moving through your different forms of communication.
Precisely.
Mode.
And if you practice, then you're able to combine all these things, right? You can do that logical piece where you're saying, well, the first thing we want to do, the second thing we want to do. So somebody who likes patterns and likes numbers is going to also connect with what you're doing, right? And it's just about being able to extend your information to the audience in a way that they can absorb it and then use it. Boy, I'll tell you, it also cuts the learning curve way, way down if you use that approach.
Let's talk about alignment across teams. So what's the most effective technique you've seen for aligning operations, entertainment, and guest-facing staff in the same communication standards? I think that people don't appreciate this enough. In every industry, you have this kind of, you might have GTM and engineering and, operations. You might have, in this case, the different elements of amusement parks or theme parks. How do you make sure that they all have the same language, even though they're doing vastly different jobs?
Really different things. Part of it's the communication that is foundational to the organization. So if you go back to the mission, vision, and values, what is that of the organization?
Because that's at its core what they all share.
Is what everybody shares, right? And so everybody has pieces that divert off of that. But if you continue to come back and circle back to that mission, vision, and values, you actually have something substantial that is relatable to everybody.
So that makes sense, but I also know you've been in some different environments, so maybe you can go into that, where maybe language wasn't even common amongst all the people. How do you manage that standard?
That piece of it? I'll tell you, one of my favorite training things that ever happened was I was working in Taiwan for an organization and was asked to go down and train at a hotel that was getting ready to open. And they sent me down there. I learned some great lessons there. Number one, ask if there's going to be a translator available.
Yeah.
There's a thought. I did not. Day 3, somebody showed up who was able to, but I was in a room with probably 60 people who had very little English language.
Right.
And so I had to do these training games and everything became physical. Everything became movement oriented.
Yeah, right.
So so that was great because movement and expression, our body language does so much to be able to contribute to translating with somebody else. The other thing is being appreciative of the culture. And I worked in India for a very long time, and the culture in India is very different from the culture in California, which is also very different from the culture in Maine.
Right.
So understanding and appreciating that, taking cues from what I'm watching and observing and listening. And again, sieving what I know to work well anywhere through that culture.
How do you have to translate, like, say, like a brand like Disney in a different environment that's culturally different, but then they have values that are maybe not completely aligned? Like, different environments, different companies have different values, and then they're going into these places, maybe using local talent that might not have had the training in those things. How does all that reduce risk?
Here's the interesting thing about that. So if you are a recognized brand and you're going into a new market, a different country, the best thing to bear in mind is that wherever you are, and this is true even in the United States, or
If you're going
working
from
between
West Coast to East
Mexico,
Coast,
yeah, I mean, it's different, right? State to state, it's not the same thing, right? Every place you go is a Petri dish, and every person that dives in that Petri dish is going to change the culture. So businesses, brands need to be really aware and cognizant of the fact that the foundation will remain the same. That Petri dish is not going to change.
Right.
But the configuration of what's inside is going to modify a bit based on the people that are coming in.
Yeah.
And if you're attuned to that and you're receptive to that, then you're going to find that your mission, your vision, your values will still align. You just have to engage in a way that allows it to be acceptable and understood.
And that's what they also want,
process.
because when you go into a new area, you want to also take on some of the environment
Absolutely.
as part of the value add of having something there.
Well, and that makes it approachable for the people that you're trying to reach out to, right? If you don't engage with your team members, you're not going to engage with your market, and you're not going to be able to be a profitable entity. So you look at something like Coca-Cola, which is, I think, a wonderful example. If you drink Coca-Cola from around the world, it tastes different.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different in every country because they use the water from there. It's different. It's just a little bit different process, the bottling plants, et cetera. But it's still the same consistent product. It still has the same messaging. It just is reflective of the community it's in.
Absolutely. Let's talk about accessibility and inclusivity. How do IDA principles reduce communication-related risk for both guests and staff?
If we choose to treat people as people, then we're going to be doing much better in general. So two people that are using a wheelchair, for example, are going to use their wheelchair differently. They're going to have different abilities. They're going to have different interests and likes. I mean, they're human beings. They just happen to be in a similar conveyance.
Right. We know that, like, when you go into an amusement park, they might have a trolley for walking people who don't want to walk as far. You might be able to do the walking. So you have all these different modes of transportation, as an example, if you can walk around, but not so much if you have other things. I do know that, working in the industries that I've worked in, and even tech, it's like we segment everything and then we think the job is done. But that segmentation is there so that we can give a unique experience to each of those segments so they get the most value out of it, right?
Correct. So, but when we circle back and we think about a human being a human, right? And we approach it from a humanistic standpoint, then we don't say, oh, that person is deaf, so they can or can't do this, or they can or can't experience this, or this person is low vision, they can or can't do this.
Yeah.
If instead we go, oh, this person is a mom, and this person is a dad, and this person is an individual, and treat people that way, even asking questions, right? It shouldn't be cut and dry. Oh, you are this kind of person, so you go stand in this line over here.
Yeah.
It's about, what do you need? How can I help you? How can I support you? And again, that goes back to training, right? It's just that communication and understanding that people are people. And I think organizations that are wise and will bring people in, like individuals like myself, that understand creative intent, artistic intent, and can elevate the intentions, not to change the integrity of that artistic idea or that creative idea, but it's to elevate it to a level that allows acceptance for everybody to come in. You're doing things like How is your sound system set up so that somebody who maybe is hard of hearing or deaf actually can feel the vibrations of what's going on, or maybe even visually see the music that's happening or the tempo?
Right.
How do you do that? Including closed captioning, making sure
And
that
that
your
makes the whole
walkways are
experience
wide.
more, again, kinetic and interesting
It's
for
good
everyone.
For everyone, right. Adjusting your lighting or having multiple levels of lighting opportunities available to people is not going to impact anybody.
Right.
Instead, it's going to actually make the experience
It's
better.
gonna elevate everything.
It's holistic, right?
Yeah, I love the thing you were just saying about artistic, the different layers, and how getting individuals into that up levels that experience. When we talk about risk and risk management in construction or in event planning or any of these things, it's always about, we're not trying to stop the risk. We're trying to let the good business happen and mitigate this other thing, right?
And if you look ahead, right? I mean, let's go back to construction, right? The biggest cost in construction, frankly, are change orders.
Yeah, right.
Because people don't think ahead to stuff, right? I had the advantage of working in a construction office when I was between jobs. And it was fascinating because I'd see these change orders come through and I'd see how much it affected the budget, right? And all these things. And I was like, ooh, this is a good lesson for me to take away to everything I'm doing. And so if you do things like bring somebody in that's got a specific expertise early on that understands the creative process, right? That's the big scare for people that are creative. Don't step on what I'm doing because it's magic, right? Yeah. And that's true, it is. But I think the magic happens when you have somebody come in that can go, let's widen this by 2 feet.
Yeah, the aperture widening is really important.
Right. And that aperture is applicable to the whole thing. So from the blue sky to the early phases of drawing, construction drawing, you can alleviate a lot of issues that could potentially become risks, which includes guests being upset because they can't experience this or that or the other thing, which is also a huge liability when it comes to things like lawsuits. And I hate to talk about that stuff, but that's the reality.
Yeah. What are some, before we get into risky or too risky, what's some areas in your industry, in the amusement park industry, where you think people are doing training really well, that there's good examples or stories from the road that you can give where it's meant a big difference to really continuously enable your people, and because of it, the organization is viewed as a great organization by both the customers and internal employees?
That's a wonderful question. I think that organizations in general, and I don't want to call anybody out because that's not nice, but I think organizations that really put intention on their training and their retraining really do the best services to their guests. And I find actually that very often smaller organizations like museums, family entertainment centers do a much better job because they approach it from a humanistic standpoint.
Yeah.
My interaction is with you. My interaction might also be with the POS system. Yeah. But the truth is that impression I'm making is going to make or break the business. Right. And the companies that understand that and realize that it's why people want to come back.
What about the companies in the amusement industry that seems to be shrinking people, replacing people interactions with screen interactions and all of this? Does that impact guest satisfaction and those kind of things? Are they happy with all of the non-people, or is having a people being trained and helping the experience, does that typically lead to a better experience for people?
In my opinion, I think it's both. I think it's a mix. I think having the technology...
Because you have different people who want different things.
Right. So I think the technology can be really advantageous, but not everybody wants technology. And the truth is, when we're sitting at home in our homes and we have our smartphones in front of us, or we have our computers or our smart TVs, what have you, we are tied to our technology just on a personal level. The difference is when we go out to an attraction, when we go out to a hotel, even when we go to a hospital, right? We are engaging with human being on some level. Right. And that's a very different connectivity, because that human to human contact, I think, is integral to our success, regardless of where you are in the world. And that component is one that does require sensitivity. It requires training. It requires knowledge of the business and the brand. And you can't always get that through a tablet, and it doesn't always translate in the same way. But a human, when you come in contact with a human, they make or break your experience far faster than anything else that you could run up against technologically.
Yeah, if we're like hitting a screen, we might be annoyed at the technology, but it might not transfer to the brand as easy as a human who's not being a good employee to the company.
And people remember I just talked about this the other day in a session I gave to the IOPA ambassadors. You know, when we talk about things like a queue line for a roller coaster, right? The person's experience is not just the ride. Right. The person's experience is finding where the queue is, getting in the queue line, going through the queue line, being loaded onto the ride itself, being offloaded on the ride, going down the exit queue, going back out into the space. That's a huge journey for somebody. And so meeting people along the way that make it fun, make it interesting, make it welcoming, inviting, helping them in or out, regardless of what their circumstances might be, that's huge. And somebody that's generous and kind and smiling and treats the person as an individual is going to give the brand a far more satisfactory bead on the guest's experience than somebody who's grumpy.
Yeah, right.
That will turn somebody completely off the other way. They might have loved the ride.
I think we've all been to a Lowe's. Nobody knows what's going on there. You know, so I'll call people. I don't care. Let's play a game of risky or too risky. Okay.
Oh boy.
Okay.
It is more early. I'm just
replacing verbal instructions with icons only in high stress areas. Risky or too risky?
It's risky.
How come it's not too risky? Like, how do you choose icons for an area?
Let me circle back a second. So I think iconography is the way to go when you're trying to give people simple instruction. But if you're doing iconography, make sure that you're using high contrast. Yeah. I worked with an organization that some of their branding colors were purple and pink, and they thought it was okay to do their signage in purple and pink. And I'm like, and it was in dark. It was in the dark. And I'm like, you know, even people with good eyesight are not going to be able to see that. And certainly people that have low vision are not going to be able to see that.
But the brand is everything.
The brand, you know, but, you know, do high contrast, do clear iconography. But if it is in a high stress area, have somebody there that is able to direct people kindly to where they might need to go or ask questions. Yeah. I don't know how many times people have stood in front of a bathroom and asked where the bathroom was.
I do it all the time.
Right?
It's the most embarrassing thing I habitually do.
Or walk into the men's restroom, which, you know, I do at least once a year.
Letting staff improvise guest communication without scripts or heavy guidelines, risky or too risky?
I think it's risky.
Yeah.
I don't think it's too risky if you've done your training properly.
What do you think about things like maybe Meow Wolf or where maybe they put improvisers into scenes? How do you control the experience? This is just because I'm curious.
Sure.
How do you control experience when part of the experience is that it's not controlled?
Well, it goes back to...
Is that the guidelines?
It's guidelines, right? You give guardrails to your team members. This is what your world is. This is who you are in your world. We want you to grow your own character inside the world. But we also want this to be a living, vibrant place that you are living in. So it's always going to be ebbing and flowing. When you interact with somebody, you need to make sure you're staying in character. You need to make sure you're keeping them in world. But you also need to make sure if they're asking you serious questions like, where's the restroom, that you're able to do it in a format that still aligns with your persona, still aligns with the environment you're in, but actually delivers the information in a way the guests can understand.
Yeah, I love that. Because, I mean, if you were even a character in these environments, you would still know where those things are. You wouldn't just suddenly not know. So you should have...
Absolutely. And the challenge is sometimes, too, and again, this goes back to training, getting your team to understand that you may have someone ask you where the restroom is. I use that example because it's an obvious one. But you may have somebody ask you a question 20 times a day, where's the restroom? Yeah. And you might get to the point at number 14 where you're just annoyed answering the question, especially if you're standing right in front of the sign that says that way, right?
Yeah.
The challenge for the individual, you know, for the cast member, for the team member, the performer, what have you, is that person's asking you that question the very first time. They don't know that you've asked that question, been asked that question 14 times. They don't know that you're annoyed and don't want to answer it anymore. You need to be respectful and courteous enough to that guest to give them that answer the same way you did to the very first person asked in the morning.
Absolutely. In theater and things, doing different experiences, it's like you always try to remember that this is the first time they're asking that, right? And so I definitely get the idea of making sure that that you answer it, that you engage in a way that it's helpful to them. What is the responsibility of the client? What's the responsibility of the park goer, of the hotel guest? Like, they're playing a role too. How do you train them to be better at their their role in that whole experience?
Well, it's modeling, right? It's in some degree, I would almost say it's mentoring of sorts, right? If we're behaving correctly in our space, if we are being kind and respectful and courteous, then that is a model that they're going to see.
That's part of the Disney model, clean
exactly,
and
right?
those things. Then
You
people
see a piece
act
of
differently.
trash on the floor, you pick it up, you put it in a receptacle, and people will do likewise. They'll think twice before they leave their table cluttered, right? Because
everybody else is doing something different.
Exactly. So I think it's a modeling system.
I love that. Removing physical signage because the app handles it, risky or too risky?
Personally, I think it's too risky. Not everybody has an app. Not everybody has a smartphone. That's a misnomer. Sometimes people's batteries die. Sometimes things happen, like they can't get connectivity, or
like your water ride ruined my phone.
Right, exactly, right. Whatever that is. But I think you need to have both. I think you need to have that support system. And also, there's a lot of people that, honestly, we want to have our people. I think an app is great. My personal opinion is we also want people's eyes up. We want people experiencing what they're in, and you're not experiencing what you're in if you're looking this way.
Right, absolutely. And if we're going to do that, then we need to improve those experiences dramatically from where they are today. Training staff with only digital modules, risky or too risky?
I'll say too risky. And part of the reason I'll say too risky is that you can, with digital, and I will say this because I'm head of content for Study Academy USA, and we develop content. We work with organizations to create bespoke content, but we also have our own content that we've developed. It's all e-learning. But what we do is we make sure we apply the multi-levels of learning to that training. So the training could be done with me coming into a large group. I can use the same training and deliver to a large group, which allows for question and answer and, real life experiences and tangents and all that good stuff, laughter right out loud. But for an individual coming in that maybe is mid-season replacement, or maybe there isn't anybody else being hired at the time, the digital model, if it's well done, will allow them to get the exact same information that they need.
So you're speaking today on clown bias, essentially hidden assumptions, right? That I got that right. What's one hidden bias teams often have about communication that increases risk?
That if you talk, people listen. It's not a singular. Communication is not one thing. Communication is facial. It is body language. It is tonality. It is pitch. It is everything. And you can actually talk to people with whom you don't share language and deliver information just by you speaking and having interesting ways of communicating vocally and your body language and everything else. So
last question. We get a lot of people from different areas, particularly in the insurance space, risk managers who are coming into the industry. But so I like to ask this question, which is, if you were giving someone coming into your industry a piece of advice, what would that advice be as they enter into their career?
Learn as much as you can about your brand. Learn as much as you can about the people working in your space. Learn as much as you can from the frontline individuals, as much as you can learn from maybe C-suite individuals, because that exposure, top to bottom, is what's going to give you the information you need to be successful in your job.
Thank you for joining me on Brick by Brick. It's been great talking to you. I really think enablement is a critically overlooked skill that I'm always trying. Everyone says we have it, and then you double click on it and they're not really doing a great job of it. So thank you for all of the hard work you do in the industry. I appreciate it.
Sure, I appreciate it. And I'm always happy to talk to people about it. I just think it's so important that if you have knowledge, you share it.
Thank you very much.
Risk Management Brick by Brick is brought to you by TrustLayer. Find out how TrustLayer manages risk so that the people can build the physical world around us. Head over to TrustLayer.io, and then make sure to subscribe to Risk Management Brick by Brick on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. On behalf of the TrustLayer team, thank you for listening.